Having got the rear hub to a point where I can use it in the axle, it's time to refit the axle with its bearings and start constructing the band brake. There are 4 carriers, each with a integral, I suppose you'd call it, ball race. As you can see here, it's pack them with grease, fill them with ball bearings and assemble. No mass production here, so all the caps have to be kept to their relative bases. I just love the quality of the work. Obviously these were machined by hand and yet perfectly adequate for the job. Just from a different time. Top was done in exactly the same way, plenty of grease, filled up with ball bearings, not so tight that they bind. General practice is leave enough room for one ball bearing to be missing. And then the application of grease to the freewheeling side of the axle, just in case it's a bit dry. And then a quick check to make sure everything moves correctly without binding. I'm happy enough with that. It seems to be working well. So now the band brake. For the band itself, I'm using a piece of metal strapping that bundles of steel come in. It's flexible, almost spring steel, and still workable. So I've reduced the width down to fit in the groove for the braking material. The braking material itself is a brake shoe, or brake lining off of a early auto cycle. It matches the diameter of the hub. So put this in place and shape it so that it can conform to the hub. At this point it will remain loose until the whole mechanism is in place and working, and then I'm hoping that I will be able to bond the brake lining to the band by applying epoxy and holding everything in place with the mechanism. Once it has set, I shall then reinforce the joint with rivets. Now with the band suitably shaped and marked for length, I can start concentrating on the operating arm. A piece of 1/4 inch mild steel that I shall anchor to the actual band with an adjustable joint. The other end will then thread into the forged link that pivots on the frame. So for the anchor, I've put a piece of round bar in the lathe, and as you can see here, I'm reducing down the adjustable side, bringing it down to a less heavy looking This is then centre drilled to get the drill running concentric in the work. Drilled to a tapping size for quarter cycle. Most of the threads on this are either Whitworth coarse or cycle threads. I don't think being lazy, I use the angle grinder to grind off the end rather than parting it off or putting in the hacksaw. But for the slot of the band, I reverted back to the old technique of a hacksaw. With the slot cut, I then removed excess material on each side, more for a flat seat for the bolt to butt up against rather than reducing weight or anything, but it did look better with the two flat sides, and again finished by hand, as I'm sure the originals would have been. But with the cheat of removing most of the material with an angle grinder. I'm sure the Victorians would have used these if they had them available. I often hear of people saying Chippendale stuff. You know, the excellence was in the skill of the workers. But I can't imagine anybody in business at that time, if they had machinery to do the job, they wouldn't have used it. Maybe the level of finish would have been better. They wouldn't compromise as much as they do nowadays. And one final shape across the top here, just to make everything tidy. These will all be polished later. I have it in my head to nickel plate as much as possible. In fact, I could do a bit of advice. Should the nickel plate be bright or should it be dull? What would have been preferable in Victorian times? So if anybody out there has an opinion, could you please put it in the comments below. Here you can see me assembling the link arm, should we call it, to the actual band. Inserting the brake line in again. This is just to keep everything dimensionally correct for when all the bends are marked. At the top here I'm inserting the frame pivot arm. God, it's hard to know what to call these things. But yeah, happy enough, that seems to be working fine. So I shall put a lock nut on to stop the adjuster coming undone when it's in position, and then start concentrating on the pivot arm, frame pivot arm. With everything assembled, I should be able to turn the frame the correct way up and work from the frame pivot arm up towards the handlebars. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.